By 1986, Metallica was no longer a rumor whispered through tape trading circles. They were a force to be reckoned with. A storm building over the metal world, gathering speed, weight, and confidence. Kill 'Em All had kicked the door open with youthful violence. Ride the Lightning had proven Metallica could think, and could evolve, and could feel. But now, they stood on the precipice of something much larger, an unspoken pressure that every artist who survives sudden ascension eventually feels. The pressure to follow greatness with something greater. Metallica was growing fast, and not just musically. The internal friction that had plagued their earliest years was fading. The lineup, Hetfield, Ulrich, Hammett, and Burton, was no longer a revolving door of egos, addictions, and instability. It was now a unit, sharpened by touring, bonded by hardship, and driven by ambition. James Hetfield was developing into more than a riff machine. He was discovering vulnerability, authority, and thematic depth. Lars Ulrich was molding Metallica's business mind, navigating opportunities, networking, and pushing the band outward and upward. Kirk Hammett, under the strict but transformative eye of Joe Satriani, was refining every vibrato, every bend, every melodic instinct. Cliff remained the band's quiet architect, the theorist, the philosopher, the one member who could hear music in dimensions the others didn't even know existed. The band had momentum, but also the sense that time itself was accelerating. Metallica wasn't just becoming successful, they were becoming inevitable. After the critical leap of Ride the Lightning, Metallica wanted to work with a producer who shared their evolving ambition. They had their eyes set high, specifically on Geddy Lee of Rush. Hetfield and Ulrich admired Rush's precision and their complexity. They saw Geddy as someone who understood ambitious rock on a compositional level, but Geddy's schedule was full and time was running short. So Metallica chose familiarity. They returned to Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen, the same place where they forged Ride the Lightning, and reunited with producer Flemming Rasmussen. But this wasn't some default decision, it was trust. Rasmussen understood their work ethic, their vision, and he knew how to capture a sound that was equal parts raw and massive. This time, though, Metallica came prepared. Not rushed, not frantic, but deliberate. They booked twice the studio time they had for any previous album. This meant room to breathe, experiment, refine, and the luxury of time that few thrash bands had. Rasmussen said it best when he said, "This was the album where they walked in with confidence, not arrogance, confidence. The riffs were tighter, the arrangements were sharper, the ideas were deeper. Every member brought something evolved. Metallica wasn't just making songs, they were sculpting a world." Unlike Ride the Lightning, which was built around themes of fear and fate, Master of Puppets didn't begin with a concept, it became one organically. As songs formed, a pattern emerged. Manipulation, control, the unseen forces that dominate human lives, addiction, war, religion, madness, corporate power, even Metallica's own future fame. Every track explored a different kind of puppeteer, and the people pulled by its strings. But none of this was planned. It evolved as the band wrote, demoed, and arranged the material. What began as a collection of riffs was becoming a thesis. Metallica wasn't just growing musically, they were growing intellectually. Metallica knew that they needed the perfect opener, something that mirrored the deceptive elegance of Fight Fire with Fire, but elevated it. Cliff Burton began experimenting with acoustic textures, and soon the band had a medieval-sounding intro that lulled listeners into a calm trance. Then, detonation. Battery explodes with one of James Hetfield's most ferocious riffs of all time, written late at night in the cramped confines of the band's Oakland rehearsal space. Thematically, the song is a multi-layered puzzle. Many interpret it as an anthem for the Bay Area thrash scene, a rallying cry for speed and unity. But Hetfield once described it differently. Positive and negative charge, push and pull, like a battery. In the end, Battery represents exactly what it sounds like. Raw force. The charge that powers the album's entire circuit. A blistering declaration that Metallica had arrived at their next evolutionary stage. Of all songs written during the Master of Puppets sessions, this was the one that felt monumental from the very beginning. It started as a rough instrumental demo, a scaffold of riffs played in a dusty El Cerrito garage. But the moment the band began expanding it, they knew it wasn't just another song. They were building something colossal. Every member contributed something meaningful. Hetfield refined the rhythmic structure and wrote the lyrics. Lars Ulrich pushed for more transitions, tempo changes, and scale. Kirk Hammett penned some of the melodic lead lines that give the middle section its emotional lift. And Cliff Burton crafted harmonies, counter melodies, and the classical-inspired arrangements that glue it all together. Thematically, it's Metallica's most direct metaphor. Addiction as a puppeteer, drugs as the master. Every line emphasizes control, domination, and dependency, twisting your mind and smashing your dreams. The structure is bold, an 8.5-minute odyssey that defied every norm of thrash metal at the time. Lars later admitted, "If it wasn't long enough, we'd add another riff, make it bigger, if it still feels right." In the studio, Rasmussen helped the band layer rhythm guitars until the song felt titanic. The middle clean section is delicate, haunting, and sorrowful, and that was shaped largely by Cliff Burton. It's the heart of the album, a moment of tragic clarity before the riffs come crashing back in. This is a track that transcends metal music. It's also the track that would eventually be preserved by the U.S. Library of Congress, not to mention surging back into the global consciousness decades later through Stranger Things. Metallica knew they were writing something huge. What they didn't know was that they were writing history. After 2 high-octane tracks, Metallica made a bold decision. Slow things down and darken the mood. The Thing That Should Not Be is one of the heaviest, most suffocating songs they'd recorded up to that point. And it was also their first experiment with D-standard tuning. The core riff began with Kirk Hammett, inspired by Rush's Jacob's Ladder, though transformed into something much thicker and more menacing. Cliff Burton pushed the band to explore Lovecraftian themes again, the unimaginable horrors beneath the sea, the ancient gods of madness. This track isn't thrash, it's a march, a crawl, and a descent. Burton shaped the harmonic framework, building eerie chords and chromatic lines that feel the pressure increasing beneath the ocean floor. The lyrics embrace Lovecraft fully, making this the closest Metallica ever came to pure horror storytelling. Fans do love it, but it's an unusual creature in their catalog. Mid-tempo, sludgy, and ominous. Live performances over the years have been rare, but on the album it acts as the perfect transition, dragging the listener deeper into the conceptual darkness, preparing them for the psychological journey that lies ahead. By the time Metallica began assembling Sanitarium, they had matured enough creatively to build songs that lived outside of thrash entirely. The earliest form of this song actually began connected to what would later become Orion. It was all one long meditative arrangement titled Only Thing. But once the band began shaping the material, it became clear this wasn't a single composition, it was 2 emotional worlds. And Sanitarium was its own entity. Thematically, it draws heavily from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Institutionalization, confinement, the crushing weight of authority, and the slow erosion of sanity. James Hetfield's lyrics capture both resignation and rebellion. The verses float like a sedated lullaby. The ending erupts like a breakout riot. Musically, the song is one of Metallica's most complex structures. It shifts between 10/4, 6/4, and 4/4. Sometimes it's subtle enough that the listener feels the instability without being consciously aware of it. That rhythmic imbalance mirrors the mental imbalance of the narrator. Cliff Burton's fingerprints are all over the arrangement. His sense of harmony, his love for unexpected chord tensions, his melodic thinking, even the clean guitar voicings echo his theoretical ear. Then there's Hammett's solo. It's mournful, bending, and searching crushing. It feels less like a technical showcase and more like a scream for help. By the time the track reaches its explosive final minute, Sanitarium becomes a rallying cry, the sound of someone breaking free or breaking down. Metallica would perform this song over 1,000 times, and it remains one of their most emotional pieces. Sanitarium isn't about madness, it's about being trapped in madness that you did not choose. If Sanitarium captures the collapse of an individual's soul, then Disposable Heroes widens the lens to focus on systems of control, specifically war. This is Metallica's most direct anti-war commentary until the song One. But even here, James avoids political finger-pointing. Instead, he paints a visceral, personal portrait of a young soldier being chewed up and spit out by the machinery of combat. There's a brutality to the track that goes beyond the riffs. It's in the pacing, blistering, relentless, and breathless. A punishing 220 beats per minute sprint that never allows the listener a moment to rest. The writing process reveals how deeply the band invested in the track. Early demos included an extra fast section, which was later removed and reworked into part of Damage Incorporated. A very early example showing how Metallica recycled and reshaped ideas during this era of extreme creativity. The lyrics are sharp and vivid and almost novelistic. Back to the front. You will do what I say when I say. The repeated commands mirror military indoctrination. The musical barrage mirrors machine gun fire. The structure mirrors the endless cycle of expendability. And while the band avoids calling themselves political, Disposable Heroes is undeniably a critique of systems that see human lives as numbers on a chart, whether in war, business, or even professional sports. As Hetfield has hinted, this isn't just a song, it's a warning, a howl against the grinding gears of institutions that see people as parts. Metallica had touched on religion before, but never with the clarity or venom that's found in Leper Messiah. Written largely in the wake of the 1980s televangelist boom, the song is a direct attack on false prophets, those who exploit faith, manipulate the desperate, and enrich themselves through guilt and fear. Hetfield's delivery is bitter and cutting. Growing up in a Christian Science household, James had experienced religious pressure firsthand, and some listeners have interpreted the song as a reflection of that upbringing. Whether intentional or not, Leper Messiah hits with personal weight. Musically, this track is one of the album's tightest. It locks into a mid-tempo groove before exploding into a furious gallop toward the chorus. It's not the fastest song on the album, nor the most complex, but it is one of the most controlled and rhythmic. The band has acknowledged that Dave Mustaine contributed a chord idea in the earliest Metallica days, though the final track is overwhelmingly a Burton Hetfield composition. Kirk Hammett has always been adamant that Mustaine's influence is minimal, just a small fragment that the band reworked into something unrecognizable. Leper Messiah fits perfectly into the album's overarching theme, systems that prey on the vulnerable, not with brute force, but with belief. There are songs that musicians write, and then there are songs that musicians leave behind. Orion would be the latter. This 8-minute instrumental stands as the purest expression of Cliff Burton's musical soul. Named for the constellation because of its spacey feel, Orion is a fully composed piece, a multi-movement work that blends metal with classical harmony, progressive rock structure, and emotional storytelling. Nearly every section bears Burton's imprint. The intro's layered bass lines, the haunting melodic figures, halftime atmospheric interlude, the soaring harmonized guitar lines, the dramatic tempo shifts, the chord progressions that feel ancient and cosmic. Cliff arrived at Sweet Silence Studios with many of these parts already formed. Rasmussen often said Burton approached composition like a classical musician, writing counterpoint, thinking in layers, constructing long-form arcs. Originally, Orion was connected to early drafts of what would become Sanitarium. Over Over time, though, the band separated the material, realizing each piece needed its own identity. The middle section, where the album suddenly floats into a serene and lonely drift, is one of the most emotionally powerful passages in Metallica's catalog. Hetfield has the interlude's notes tattooed on his left arm. When Cliff Burton died, Orion was played at his funeral. Since then, Metallica performs the track only on rare and meaningful occasions. You could say that Orion isn't just a song, it's a monument, a musical gravestone carved in sound. The album ends with Damage Incorporated, a fast, violent, unapologetic explosion of attitude. The song begins with reversed bass chords inspired by a Bach funeral hymn. Cliff Burton heavily manipulated that into something ethereal and unsettling. Then as the track goes off, it's Metallica at their most feral. The lyrics blend aggression and social critique, touching on violence, corruption, even the corporate machinery that would eventually consume heavy metal itself. Some fans interpret it as Metallica acknowledging their coming fame and the tension between rejecting the system and becoming a part of it. The main riff draws from Deep Purple's influences, filtered through Hetfield's down-picking brutality, and the song's chaotic structure mirrors the album's themes: the destructive puppeteer, the breakdown of control. Damage Incorporated closes the record not with resolution, but with impact. It isn't closure, it's detonation, and one final swing of the axe. All in all, Master of Puppets wasn't meant to be a masterpiece. It wasn't planned as a concept album. It wasn't designed to become the defining thrash metal album of all time. But sometimes lightning doesn't strike, sometimes it calculates. When Metallica released Master of Puppets in March 1986, they had unknowingly created the first thrash metal album to go platinum. Not instantly, of course. It was a record so complete and so intricate and so powerful that it transcended the genre entirely. Touring with Ozzy Osbourne placed Metallica in front of massive audiences every night, and the band sharpened their live attack to a razor edge. They were unstoppable, climbing, evolving, accelerating toward a future none of them could see coming. Then, tragedy hit. On September 27, 1986, during the Damage Inc. tour, Cliff Burton was thrown from the band's tour bus during a crash in rural Sweden. He died instantly and was just 24 years old. Metallica was shattered. A brotherhood was cracked apart. The man who shaped so much of their musical identity was gone, but the album he helped create lived on and grew. Decades later, Master of Puppets is more than just a metal album. It's a cultural artifact, a museum piece, a milestone in musicianship, storytelling, composition, and ambition. From the U.S. Library of Congress preservation to countless bands citing it as the reason they picked up an instrument, to its improbable resurgence through Stranger Things, to Metallica still performing its songs with reverence and fury, Master of Puppets remains a towering achievement. The sound of four artists at their peak, the sound of young men fighting fate, authority, and themselves. And it's also the sound of a band unknowingly writing their own immortality. And last but not least, it's the sound of Cliff Burton, echoing through every chord, every harmony, every note, and captured in the grooves of an album that changed heavy metal forever.